Chris Scotchpole, the writer-director.
Rico Garay, I'm the actor.
I'm Larry Fessenden. I was one of the producers.
And I'm Chad Harbold, and I'm one of the producers as well.
So I'm really honored to have been asked to moderate this Q&A. Chris, you and I met, it was 5 years ago in 2019 at Fantasia, like this time, 5 years ago. I was at Fantasia, which is an amazing genre film festival in Montreal. I was screening my film, I was screening my film Knives and Skin, but I was also pitching another film that is now kind of on the back burner, but you were there also, sort of loosely pitching this film, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I actually wasn't included in their roster. I just sort of went there pretending like I was. And I had pictures of the Crumb Catcher that I would show on my phone to people, and nothing came of it, but it was, I actually made some really good friends, you included, and another filmmaker. So, you know, I think with those things, it's really about just being in a community, I think, more than anything.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, let me just say one funny thing that happened to me that festival, and then I want to talk about you as you. The funniest thing that happened to me at that fest was one of the Frontiers parties, and I was with Ariel, who's not with the film festival anymore, and I said something about Knives and Skin. It was Ariel and some other person we didn't know, and the person I didn't know was like, "Oh, Knives and Skin. Oh, that director is here. If you want to meet her, I can introduce you." And I was like, "For real? Like, that's me." But I remember it was like it was like a big kind of Glass Eye Pigs contingent was there. And so I would love for like you and Larry to talk a little bit about like, first, like how and what is, you know, Glass Eye Pigs, because you all are just this like, it's a family, it's like, you've got a cult following. I mean, it feels like this really amazing, like just churning out incredible material, and with using the same people, with interchanging, you know, parts. So can you talk a little bit with him about Glass Eye Pigs?
From my perspective, it's really a place that allows you to breathe and create. And it's not about, here's the pitch for the movie. It's more about a camaraderie and a friendship and a community that allows space to develop. It's an incubation kind of thing, or at least it was for me for many years.
Well, I will say that the reason we were there was for a project called The Ranger by Jen Wexler. And in fact, it did get made, which is a miracle. And I was with Chris and then my own son, Jack. So it was just one of those family affairs where we were there for Jen. But then sort of in the wings was Chris's project, and he and I were talking about the writing at that time and driving in the car and, you know, percolating on this movie, which we percolated for many years later. But everybody on the stage has worked at Glass Eye. Chad has produced, well, my own film, which Chris shot, you see. So it is that kind of, I always like, you know, the Chekhov idea that you, some days you're the lead actor and some days you carry the spear. And you're still important to the play, and that's how it works. Chad made Most Beautiful Island. For what it's worth, we won, I don't know, South by that year. Chad was involved in Depraved, which Chris shot with James Seward, and James Seward designed the Crumb Catcher, so on it goes. And Rigo's been there the whole time, and then slowly over time revealed that he wanted to be an actor, and that he really always was an actor. And Chris got wind of that because he was at the office with Rigo and they were pretending to work for Glass Eye, but what they were really doing is scheming and rehearsal and coming up with characters. And then Chris made a short for one of our projects, Creepy Christmas, with Rigo and Chris as Miss Millie. So there's a lot of backstory there. You can go online and look about it, but anyway, it's just a goofy time we have. But we're serious. We're trying to save the world and our own souls.
No, I mean, I think it's really, and you all are all based in New York?
That's correct.
Yeah. Even Chad, who I realized Chad and I grew up in the same hometown, Columbus, Ohio.
Yes, and I've worked with the same editor, Mike Owen.
Michael Lennon.
Yes.
And Most Beautiful Island was at South by when my film Signature Movie was there also.
Right,
So,
yes,
it was
that's right, exactly right.
We go all together. Okay.
Did you meet Anna?
Yes,
Great
oh my gosh,
Anna
yeah,
Asensio?
forget about it.
Forget about it.
Forget about it. So this project also was written by you three?
Yeah, I mean, the way.
So can you kind of talk about like that collaborative writing process? I mean, maybe that's a question you get asked a lot, but I think for myself, and I would also say that, can I back up and say, my questions for you all come from a place where I'm a writer and a filmmaker, so some of my questions are about that,
Sure.
that kind of unveiling that process. So how is it for three people to write a film?
Well, we all have our projects that we're working on. Rigo has a project that we're all really excited about that's hopefully we made soon. But I think we all have different processes, and my process is just to endlessly bother people. And I, spend a lot of time writing, and then I just am like, I'll call Rigo and I'm like, do you have this minute to speak? And he's like, knows it's probably, I'm asking for an hour. And a lot of times it's just like, okay, so it opens, and then I just say the whole thing. And I do that with so many people, like friends that are not in the industry, but there are people that I always go back to be like, okay, can you sit down and let me just talk this through? And I just sort of go from beginning to as far as I'm at that point. And Rigo and Larry were really like the people that were there from the beginning. Also, Tessa, my partner, should probably have one of those credits too, because she probably hears it more than anybody. But and I think that every time I like pitch the movie, I'm like Rigo has an incredible sense of humor, so I'm always like, I find myself saying certain things a certain way, and then they pop, and I'm like, oh God, that's great. And then other times we're down when it's like when we were about to go shoot it, it was much more like, okay, so how would we say these lines, and using kind of improv in the moment when we're in a controlled setting, and then finding a way to structure it. So for me, it's just, I'm constantly looking for an audience to like, oh, at that moment you looked away and you didn't, something's not working, and I can feel when I lost someone when I'm talking. So I really kind of like think myself as almost like an improv, or sorry, not like a comedian, like, am I getting them, am I hooking them, and that sort of thing.
But I mean, it wasn't like, I mean, you all three of you have like writing credits. So like there was like writing, I mean, so Rigo, maybe like what do you, or Larry, like what is, when you guys are writing, like what do you feel like is your, when Chris makes a phone call, or when you're all sitting in the room, like what do you feel like is the thing that you bring to that writing table?
Well, Chris is exactly what he said, but when I jumped on board to play Shane, we wrote like that character together, and his backstory, because like the character was a different type of dude at one point. So we made a whole backstory for him with the dad and all that, and the tattoos, and just some of the stuff, some of the dialogue were just like, well, he would say it this way, he would say it that way, you know what I mean? So that was when a lot of what I did in terms of writing, but this is like fully Chris's script. He's been writing this for many, many years, and well, not about many years, I'm not gonna say that, but he's been writing it for a long time, and it was just cool to just jump on board and create this character with him.
What about you, Larry? About in terms of writing with this one?
Well, I've worked with a lot of characters at Glass Eye Pix, and I love the artistic process, and I try to tap into each individual artist and their proclivities and their process. And I've worked with someone like Kelly Reichert, I've edited for her, and then you really have to slow down your pacing, because Kelly has a way of breathing with her characters, and then Ty West is a very sort of agitated, very precise, this kind of relationship. So you're kind of trying to wrangle that. Now with Chris, it would be a matter of I'd finish dinner with the family, and I'd be like, "Well, I'm going to work on Crumb Catcher," and they'd all roll their eyes, and then Chris and I would hang out for a couple hours, and I would be at the typewriter, and he'd be acting out the story. I think what I brought to it was, in my own sort of impatience and love of cinematic tropes, I'd be like, well, let's try to solve this problem. And we'd solve the problem over and over, and it was kind of wonderful. But Chris had a kind of humor and energy and aptitude for dialogue that was very specific to his own, and that's what I would just try to capture. And then he would take the work and he'd change it again, all completely. And then, there'd be an urgent need for a meeting to start the process over. So I don't know what that even means. I was just there trying to enable, encourage, trying to capture lightning in a bottle. But the project kept changing, because then it also got more real in terms of, like, we had a location, I think for a year, and we would go to that location. We'd talk about, like, how to film the scene, and like we could see this through the car could come up, we'd do it from here, what lens would we use, but the reality is it worked for me because I just love making movies, so I love trying to solve those problems, and it just helped Chris in his own personal twister of creativity. So that's what happened. And then, as I say, when we honed in further and then it became about Rigo being in the movie, then it sort of, we passed the baton to him. But there were other collaborators along the way, and certainly Tess deserves the credit for having read it so many. And it'd be funny to, when Chris would report, well, Tess didn't really like that part, that I was like, we solved the movie, and then 2 days later I'm like, didn't pass the test with Tess. And I was like, so it was just, that's what Chris does. He gets us all working.
First rule is pass it by test, really.
Yeah, yes, definitely. So we're still trying just to get Tess's approval.
Tess, how are we doing right now? Are we doing okay?
I don't know, Tess, how are we doing?
I think, okay.
Oh, good, thank God. Okay, so we can really let our hair down now.
So I want to talk about, you brought up the location. So that house, what, how, and who, and how, and what?
Like Larry was saying, we had another house, fantastic, sort of very Americana type house, and we storyboarded everything for it. And I had a relationship with the guy who owned it, who was an old ad man. He was like 90 something, and once a month I would get on the phone with him and we'd talk, and he'd tell me that I remind him of himself, and it was sort of this thing that I kept this relationship. And then COVID happened, and I called and he wasn't answering, and it turned out that he died. And we were about to shoot, and the family wasn't. They were in the period where they just didn't want to have that, understandably. And the story was really about Shane and Leah's, like, this house that was a beater that they were gonna fix up, and it was really about their life they were building. So I just went on Airbnb, for a very long time, and just emailing people, and one of them was this house, and it was just, it didn't fit the story, it wasn't right, but the guy called back and was like interested in hearing about the story more than even what it takes to shoot, and he related to it. And then I went up to the house, and he started offering, like, that his father did all these paintings. He had died, and he had said that there's hundreds of paintings in the barn that you can select which ones you want, and then it just felt like a very unique opportunity. And then I switched the idea to be, it's the publisher's house, and then it became, I remember the first time I talked about it with Rigo, it really became like everything he can't have, or like, is he able to fill these shoes? And then the house was less about the life they were building, but the life that maybe they could never have, that they wanted, that they can't have. So it's just in this way that, like, especially when you're making an independent movie and scrapping things together, you're just always looking for these opportunities that arise that allow you to tell your story more effectively and more uniquely and responsive to the world. You know, I think there's a lot of emphasis on like a Fincher aspect, like he knows it, you know, it's like these just getting it exactly right. But I think when you're making a movie like this, you can be like that too, but you have to let the world talk to you, and that's what it was with this house. So it was a very special experience. It also, I remember the first time I went up there, it was at night, or maybe that was the second time, but I remember just being like, damn, this is so scary that I can't see out, but people can see in, and then I ended up putting that into the movie.
No, I think that's what, I mean, it's like a really, to kind of come through the woods, and all that cinematography is so good. I want to talk about the cinematography, but to come through the woods and then to see this, you know, sort of like maybe what feels like a A-frame, sort of hand-built mid-century modern house or something, where like you're totally exposed. And then I love that there's so much artwork in the house, and I was going to ask you who did those paintings, because I do think that there's, I mean, I look for allegory and I look for metaphor, and I think that in this there's a lot about the kind of creative process, right? Like, you know, Rigo's character of Shane has got this novel, and he feels really doubting about that, and then you go into this house, and there's these, these, you know, paintings.
Yeah, they're all like abstract nudes. And I just loved that I sort of started running with this idea that, like, how would I place them in the scene behind a character that is experiencing something, and how the painting can become this like explosion that's happening behind them. And it's just and I love the paintings too. John Hersey Jr., who is the guy's father, who built the house as well. And he was one of the first artists in Soho. He was one of these people that just like worked every day until he died, and never really found a spotlight, but just endlessly working, and it was just such a beautiful experience going to the barn, and we stretched some canvases that had never been stretched before, and things like that.
So I want to talk about the cinematography. There's obviously some like those kind of gorgeous, you know, like really, you know, wide shots even overhead of the kind of car winding through the woods, but I want to talk about the sort of primary, I don't know, kind of like Crumb Catcher moment, like circulating around the table, that scene, and then, oh my God, the end. I don't know how many filmmakers are in the audience. How many filmmakers are in the audience? Okay. So, for me, I mean, it gave me heart palpitations. Like that kind of car chase scene, I was like, oh my God, those are like exteriors. Chad's like, do you know, exterior, overnight, stunts in the woods.
Yeah.
That is the most unfun, gorgeous footage, but the most unfun, well, I hate that stuff.
Yeah.
I write that stuff all the time, and then I'm kind of like, I find myself in the woods at 4 a.m. doing stunts, and I'm kind of like, who wrote this? Who wrote this?
Yeah, who did this to us?
I did this. So I want to talk about how you, because you also cut it, you're the editor, correct? So I want to talk about like how you all like shot and kind of choreographed that, like going around the table, and even how that was as an actor. And then I want you to talk about like how fun it was to shoot all of those stunts in the middle of the night in the woods.
Well, the Crumb Catcher scene, even when I remember when the idea first came about, the invention, and he was pitching them this idea, it was always this circular thing I was imagining. And for me, the movie stylistically is all having to do with single point of view. You don't know anything that Shane doesn't, that everything's through his point of view. So the point is that, like with that circular dolly, I just wanted it to feel like there was this shark that was circling around them, even like the way that we like, the clothing of John was supposed to feel like a shark that was circling around them. And I storyboarded everything, and it was much more complicated. But I felt like it was a time thing, but it became, I didn't want to restrict the actor, so I just sort of was like, okay, I'll just be outside, and I'm going to be circling, and we're going to do it a couple hundred times, whatever, you know what I mean? Like, and then we'll find these great moments, and then we'll try to hone in on these things, but really have, because before it was like, okay, we're going to do half a circle, then land on him, then he's going to do, and then we're going to push in, and all this stuff that would be great, but I just felt like he needs to be able to run. And so that sort of, I think that whole thing took 3 days, the Crumb Catcher bed.
Right, and I think that like 3 days, I just feel like that needs to be really unpacked for a moment, because that is on screen time. It doesn't take 3 days in screen time, or we would still be watching it. But it's those like shots like that where the camera is moving and people are talking and kind of there's like some, it's like those are really complicated, and it's really complicated to, I think for the actors who are just trying to be, I'd love to hear from Rigo too, like in that moment or in those like, were you trying to perform towards the camera? Were you just like performing and you were like, sometimes the camera wasn't on you? Like, I think that there's also that, it's that those shots are, that whole sequence is beautiful in its chaos. And I think that in terms of editorially, like you land exactly on who you need to land on. I just feel like that scene, in terms of the cinematography, the acting, the directing, the editing is like pretty sublime, and it is like that's a riddle wrapped inside a mystery, wrapped inside an enigma, to quote another film.
That scene, well, thank you, that's very kind of you to say. I guess when I was in that scene, it was very, I come from a very sketchy Long Island, Jesse Pinkman, Juggalo, pyramid scheme type of place, and I've heard all these weird schemes and scams and all that kind of stuff, so.
Like the bagel store.
Oh, good Lord. So I'm just reacting to this dude like as if it was just one of those guys from high school that's trying to get me to buy God knows what. You know what I mean? So, whatever. It was just me just reacting to John, and John is just so intense. And he's such a sweet guy, in real life. It's kind of crazy. It was just getting to that place,
So maybe also from the producers, did you schedule 3 days for that, or was that a moment where you're like, it's gonna take 1 day, we got this circular dolly, the actors know what they're doing, or was it like, I'd be curious to know what that was like.
I wasn't on at the time when we did when they shot the Crumb Catcher scene, but for I can talk about the car chase, which also
Great.
I think was a different kind of huge challenge for producing and everything else. We shot that over 3 nights as well. There was a storyboard for it, and an animatic, so like essentially an animated storyboard, so we could like watch what it was. And I think it was something like essentially like 20 setups basically in the storyboard. And then so it was about like, we had 3 nights to do it, and then I was trying to kind of break it down into which shot needed which technique to do it, right? So the first night it was all exteriors, right? So it was the camera car, which was on an arm. So the camera is like on a remote head on an arm that can move around while driving, and then was shooting 2 stunt drivers in the picture cars barreling down the road. I mean, before we went into this, I told Chris, like, you need to just drive around upstate until you can find half a mile of road with streetlights and no driveways. And so, like, and he did, and that's what we found. So we had 2 cops closing at each end. And then, so we did that all the first night. And then the second night was a tow truck carrying the first picture car with Rigo and Ella sitting in the front, lit, and then the stunt driver behind them sort of driving up close, swerving behind them, like all this stuff, right? And them acting. Chris is sitting in the back seat of the car with a monitor, and he's like punching the back of their seats every time they're supposed to like lurch forward,
Yeah,
right?
of course, yeah.
And just yelling faster, 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 and
Yeah.
walking. And then the last night was their car static in like a parking lot, just parked, and we just have lights on
Like
them,
poor
like
man's
moving
process.
around, poor man's process, right? And so that's for all the close-ups and the eyes and the steering wheels and all this stuff. And so then you cut all 3 together, and it feels like one sequence.
It was great. It was totally awesome, Larry. And then we're gonna go to the audience. Yes, Larry.